Angelo, what are the things standing out most regarding Ukraine for you, from your perspective?
Well, this is a continuation of this war of attrition. Remember, I think we need to repeat to people that this is a long-term war. Russia is taking its time. They're being very careful of not actually, to the contrary to what the Western media are saying. There are not waves of soldiers, Russian soldiers, that are going against the Ukrainian forces. I should say the NATO forces. On the contrary, it is actually the exact opposite. Now, I'm not a military expert, but we are talking about trenches war. Trenches wars, you need to have you need to have what you call missiles, artillery. Exactly, that's the word I was
Yes,
looking for.
artillery. Yes.
So they have 10-1 artillery compared to Ukraine. So I think we should be very close to the same rate of people dying when it's a trench warfare. And on the contrary, it's not Russia that is actually lacking ammunition. It's exactly the contrary. And now you have Stoltenberg that is actually saying openly that what Ukraine, the rate of using those missiles and artillery shells, if they continue like this, they will be out by the summer. So here it's a disaster what is happening right now for Ukraine. Then once Bakhmut is gone, then there's not much left. There's going to be the second line is correct me, it's Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, and after that that's open field. It's flat fields. There's there's no resistance. But again, what Russia is looking for is not to gain land, is to do this war of attrition, of demilitarization. In demilitarization, meaning destroying like NATO equipments. That's what they've been doing so far, and destroying Ukrainian soldiers' lives. Sadly.
Yes. Well, actually, it's very interesting, the point that you just brought up about how this is, and Russia has repeatedly said this from day one of the special military operation, all the way up to General Surovikin taking command, reorganizing the front line. They said that this is about grinding down Ukraine's military. And we're looking at this from, what is this, from New York Times, I think. U.S. intelligence chief says Russia lacks the forces to make major gains. And what they are claiming in this article is that they don't have the offensive potential to grab huge tracts of land. But this is not something that Russia has been trying to do at all during the entire special military operation. They're grinding down Ukraine's forces. They pick, as you pointed out, Angelo, Bakhmut, if you look on the map, it is one fortified city of many in this last defensive line Ukraine created in the Donbas region. Russian forces broke through at Soledar, and you can see how Russian control over territory has been expanding like a bubble in all directions. And this is what's allowing them to encircle Bakhmut. As a matter of fact, I think we have, this is what Bakhmut looks like right now. This is from liveuamap.com. It is a pro-Ukrainian map. This is not a pro-Russian source, and they admit there's a waterway running north to south through Bakhmut, and they're admitting that Russia has full control over the eastern part of the city, and you can see how the encirclement continues to envelop the city. And you notice that there's fewer and fewer roads going in and out of Bakhmut. And this is what I was talking about. We're zooming out. That's the Bakhmut encirclement. Soledar is here. And this is how Russian forces have expanded control over this area. So it's exactly what you said, Angela. They're not in a big rush, but they're going through this defense line. They're forcing Ukrainian troops to move to positions that are harder to defend, and that is going to cause a loss of troops and equipment to accelerate. So this is the problem. What is completely unreal is how the Western media is covering this. And I showed you this, Angelo, right before we started. This is from the Telegraph. And if someone was talking like this, they were an armchair general YouTuber and they were just having a bad case of coping, I would understand. But this is supposed to be someone we're supposed to take serious. A Russian victory in Bakhmut would be costly strategic defeat for Putin. And I just want to go to the part where they say 20,000, at least 20,000 Russians, he claims, has died in Bakhmut alone, which is a huge number. He doesn't provide any evidence at all. He claims that the ratio of Ukraine dead to Russian dead is 1 to 7, something like that. It's probably, again, Angelo, you told me this before, it's probably the opposite. And when you talk about Russia outgunning Ukraine, this is something the Western media admits. And speaking of Western media and pro-Ukrainian media, this is the Kiev Independent. This is from March 4th, 2023. So just the last week. Public data suggests over 16,000 Russian soldiers have been killed during the first year of all-out war. So they're talking about the entire special military operation. This is a pro-Ukrainian source saying 16,000 Russian soldiers are dead in total. So that's far fewer for the entire conflict than this telegram. The Telegraph is saying just in Bakhmut alone. What do you make of these ridiculous narratives, Angelo, that are coming out of the Western media, trying to spin reality up onto its head? And why do you think they are becoming more and more ridiculous with these narratives?
Well, it's a war of information. Keep in mind that information is one of the tools. They're trying to destabilize. I think one side is trying to destabilize the Russian side. Trying to hope to influence somehow people in Russia that actually might buy into those fake news. And then there's also self-suggestion. It's we say in French is a méthode couée. The more you repeat it to yourself, you might end up believing it. And
maybe it'll come true, right?
Yeah, maybe it'll come true. It's like those yogi that they need to visualize it, and somehow the quantum physics will make it happen. No, and then I think it's important is also they need to keep on funding. To have the funding from the collective West and weapons, so they need to lie for that. If only, I think, even though some politicians, most politicians, the collective West buy completely into Ukraine narrative, but if they only knew just that figure. Remember, von der Leyen, she had said 100,000 people died. Soldiers died, Ukrainian soldiers, and yes. It's probably the very, very low estimates. I think we are probably closer to 200,000 killed in action, not even talking about people crippled for life and people, all the soldiers that actually cannot go back to war. If the people in the West only knew that, I think the public opinion might change. There are, of course, some very cynical political people in the collective West that do want to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian, but lots of people in Europe might be more mindful, and if they only knew that, then people would just beg their government just to stop this massacre.
And speaking of this, so we saw one article claiming that no, it's Russia suffering all of the losses. It's one Ukrainian for every 7 Russian soldiers killed. This is from The Guardian, so most definitely a pro-Western publication. And they're saying that Ukraine is admitting that they're losing 100 to 200 a day. And then if Russia is losing 7 times that, Wagner supposedly, according to Western sources, only has 50,000 personnel in the area. They would all be gone in 2 months, and this has been going on way longer than 2 months. And I don't think they're able to replace that many losses that quickly. So obviously, someone is not telling the truth. I think it is the Western media not telling the truth. So this is the article about 81 missiles. I also want to talk about this. I pointed this out to you, Angelo, beforehand. We have seen the Western media admit that Ukraine is facing a very serious challenge to its power grid, its infrastructure. These attacks are whittling down Ukraine's power grid. They are able to restore power to certain areas in between, but they've been rationing and limiting the amount of power that could be used in certain areas. And then even if you read through this article, it says why Russia's infrastructure strike strategy isn't working. They admit that Ukraine's power grid is very precarious and it could completely collapse at any moment. This is the whole point of what Russia is doing. They're not trying to knock it out with one blow. This is attritional. It is chipping away slowly and patiently at Ukraine as a nation and conserving its fighting capacity at the same time. It is pacing themselves for a long-term, intense conflict. And do you have anything else you want to talk about Ukraine? We might go back to this topic if there's questions, but any last thoughts on this before we move to Georgia?
Just while touching infrastructure, it's really important just to, those are double usage, civilians, but also military. When you have trains that can move from north to south, going from Poland to southeast, then you can move troops really quickly and you can move equipments. Now, if you don't have any more electricity, then everything becomes extremely difficult. You cannot move those tanks via road. Would be just too difficult. So it's important to see that this infrastructure, it's a must. They have to go through that. Additional to that, I think lots of missiles are used right now to destroy air defense, and I don't know what you think. Are you expecting once they get rid of most air defense? Are you expecting something similar to what they did in Syria, starting massive bombing? With jet flights. How do you see it, Brian?
Actually, that's a really good question, and I think that they will. I mean, the only reason they're not is because of Ukraine's air defense. This is something that the Western media has never really explained to the public very well. The U.S. was able to act with impunity over the skies of Iraq, for example, because Iraq had horrible, antiquated, poorly manned, poorly trained air defense forces. Ukraine does not. When they started out with a large number of very capable systems, and that is exactly what they're doing. Every time they do one of these missile strikes, yes, they're degrading Ukraine's power grid. That's true. But every time they do this, Ukraine attempts to intercept these missiles, and that expends their interceptors. There's a finite supply of these. The West admittedly cannot resupply them with Soviet-era missiles, and they even have shortages of Western air defense missiles. So this is a huge problem for Ukraine. And I think we've already seen some evidence suggest that Russia is beginning to use its military aviation over at Avdiivka, which is outside of Donetsk city. There have been bombings there by Russian military aviation, in addition to the standoff attacks that Russia has been carrying out all along. So yes, I think they're going to try to degrade it to a certain point, and then we will see a gradual increase of Russian military aviation being used. And this is something even the Pentagon admits. They have got almost all of their military aviation still intact for use for something. They just don't know what. And they would love for Russia to try to fly over with Ukraine's air defense systems intact and lose all of their planes like the U.S. was doing over Vietnam. But they're not going to do that. They're being very patient, and they're doing this step by step. So I think you touched on a really good point there about expending Ukrainian air defense systems and then using military aviation step by step. Let's see. We've got some questions coming in, but I'll write that one down about the U.S. intervening in Mexico. I think that is another story for another time. But let's move to Georgia. Let's take a look at this. So what this really was, and I think it's obvious to all, this is the U.S. trying to open a second front against Russia. The proxy war is not going well in Ukraine, and the U.S. would like to create crises all along Russia's border to try to force Russia to divert resources elsewhere, so that there could be some sort of relief for Ukraine. They're talking about Georgia drops foreign agents law after protest. And when they say foreign agents law, this is about transparency. We've talked about, Angelo, you and I, about the U.S. National Endowment for Democracy and how they meddle in nations all around the world, their internal political affairs. This is something that is illegal under international law, under the UN Charter, talking about political independence and being unable to intervene in another nation's internal political affairs. So this is to make it more transparent who these groups are receiving foreign money and to try to control them, because they have no right to do this in Georgia. So the U.S. mobilized all of these opposition groups that they are funding to go out and protest. And it shows you how bad the problem is, that these forces are so powerful that they could force the government to withdraw a bill that is perfectly legitimate and a bill that the U.S. itself has had on the books for decades. The Foreign Agent Registration Act, that I think is actually much more strict than what Georgia was talking about. Angela, do you have any insight into this? We saw them do this in Thailand too. There was an NGO law, and the U.S. sponsored mobs came out and they put pressure on the government. The government backed off. What do you think about all this?
Well, this law is about giving transparency. If you receive more than 20% of funds from abroad, from governments, you have to declare it. They're just asking for transparency. I mean, and that is part of democracy, and also preserving your sovereignty, because if you have foreign meddling, that goes against your democracy. So it's very interesting. You see, they withdraw the bill, but then protests are continuing and they're getting more violent. It reminds me of what happened in Hong Kong in 2019. There was a bill, extradition bill, and started, you had massive protests, and the government listened. They say, well, let's wait. It's not the right time. They withdrew the bill, and the protests turned into extremely violent riots. And
Yes.
Then it turned into an attempt of color revolution. So you see, the thing is that those movements, those foreign agents, and that's always the usual suspects, National Endowment for Democracy, the George Soros behind those movements. They had been waiting for any excuse, and that was a good excuse. I just want to add one thing. I just realized that we had a color revolution in Georgia already in 2003. There was the rose color revolution, and we had Saakashvili that came into power back then. Then you see, that didn't work all the way. It makes me think that those color revolutions, sometimes they need to do it in 1, 2, or 3 phases. You cannot do it overnight, but you plant the seeds. So they planted the seed already back in 2003, and somehow it got the democracy of Georgia got partially hijacked. Well, the same in Ukraine. Ukraine had 2 phases. 2004, you had the Orange Revolution, and then they planted the seeds already back then. And the final blow was 2014, the Maidan color revolution. Remember, there's also another link here. You had Saakashvili that was put into place into Georgia. He became the president, but he was a puppet, and he was actually active in the Maidan revolution. Well, guess who were the snipers in Maidan revolution? They were aiming at 2 sides. They were killing protesters and policemen. They were Georgians. So there's a very strong link between Georgia, Georgian agents, and Ukraine. So you see, that's very, very evil. And also, there's something very interesting about Saakashvili. So Saakashvili, at some point, he had some problems in Georgia, so they didn't want him. They wanted to put him in jail. What does he do in 2014? He leaves Georgia and he goes to Ukraine. Overnight, they gave him a passport, Ukrainian passport, and they gave him the title as a governor of Odessa. Yes. Then later on, Poroshenko stripped the citizenship of Saakashvili, and then he was given back, I think, I think it's maybe Zelensky that gave him back the citizenship. But now he's actually back in Georgia in prison, So you see, I mean, very, very dirty criminal, even Georgia, and nobody wants him actually. Saakashvili right now, you see, Saakashvili was similar to Zelensky. He was the puppet of the West. Now you have the West rejecting him because he's got some crimes, lots of things that he did, and Georgia and Ukraine, they don't want him either. So he's a criminal for everyone. But it was on the first place, it was the first puppet that the West chose. And you need to look at the background. Every time those are Western educated puppets, and you'll find the same profile. If you go to Moldavia, if you go to Poland, always Western educated. There's a co-opting, and then they groom them and they push them, to have a function, and they have that's how they have their puppets. It's a system of co-opting. So whenever people elect those people, keep in mind that before electing them, they were selected for you, and they are going to give you the illusion of free choice. But no, no, no. Same as Taiwan in Taiwan. Taiwan didn't came here by chance. No, she was selected first. There's a co-opting system. Was selected. They push that image. They put massive exposure, and we all know there's something extremely important. The rates of exposure you get, that's pretty much the same rate of vote you get. It's all about exposure. Give me lots of exposure and you win. Same as in Macron. Macron, nobody knew about him, but overnight you get all the media. 8 years ago, everybody was talking about it. And that he was selected. You didn't vote for him. It was already done deal. That's how they do. That's how they did with Ukraine and Georgia.
Yes. That's what the NED does. They pour money into the media, into political parties, into fake human rights organizations, and that's what they do. They carve out a space in a targeted nation's information space and media space and political space, and they start growing. It's like a tumor, and then eventually it starts taking over. It starts pushing out other institutions in the country that function and give it sovereignty. So this, I put this up on the screen. This is from The Guardian, and this is explaining exactly what you just explained, Angela. We're not imagining this or repeating RT or something like that. This is admitted in the Western media that 4 years, 4 countries, the U.S. used the National Endowment for Democracy to knock out the government in Serbia, Georgia, this in Ukraine in 2004, and they attempted regime change in Belarus, but it failed. Just as you say, they've tried many times, and they're just waiting for an opportunity. So this article here, so Georgia drops foreign agents law after protests, but if you read through the article, they admit that the protesters aren't going home. Now they want the whole government out, just like in Hong Kong. The government met their demands, and then they have more demands. It's because they do not serve the interests of the city or the country or wherever these protests are happening. They serve U.S. interests. U.S. wants control, and they want sovereign governments out, and they want to install their client regime. And what is the point of this in terms of Georgia? Well, when they got Saakashvili onward, then the U.S. pumped weapons and military training into Georgia. By 2008, they attacked Russia. We saw that war with Russia, very short war that Georgia lost, and they suffered a lot of consequences for that, just like Ukraine is suffering in the proxy war against Russia right now. And now these protesters are back in the streets in Georgia to start the whole process again, to follow Ukraine over the cliff of the cliff that all U.S. proxies fall over eventually. So I think it's very important for people to understand that. We have to talk about Taiwan. I think, and I saw a couple of questions about Victoria Nuland being in the Philippines, and also what would the Philippines do if the U.S. was putting their bases there and asked the government if they could launch missiles during a war with China, because that is what the U.S. is getting ready to do. So the Philippines, they face a big problem. If the government doesn't do what the U.S. says, they will do the color revolution in the streets of the Philippines. They will turn the country inside out. So this is something that Southeast Asia has been doing for many years, trying to make certain concessions with the U.S. so they don't completely destroy their country while also trying to preserve their sovereignty over the long term. Angela, you saw this process take place in Hong Kong. China got control over it. Now we hear China talking openly about fighting color revolution inside China and helping their partners fight color revolutions. Do you think this is something that could possibly translate into cooperation here in Southeast Asia?
Yes, absolutely. And I think keep in mind that the people are getting educated about those color revolution. That's it used to be a new concept. A few years ago, people, even in Hong Kong, people didn't know about this. Actually, thanks to you, you were one of the very first to do that, and you are the only one to do it. For example, in Thailand, just educating people, actually educating people also about what means to be a sovereign state. Just that's the foundation. You yourself and myself, we don't really care whoever is elected, but what we want is people that have a real democracy, meaning protect their sovereignty, because democracy is a process of self-determination. So who are going to decide? Do you want you to decide for yourself, or do you want the decisions to be done in Washington? So you see, in order to do that, you need to just get rid of those foreign agents, or you can have something in between. You have a law of that foreign agents need to be declared. At least it's transparent. I'm going to influence, but that's who I am. So, and then people might think differently once people know, because it's not transparent. If it's not transparent, I'll give you an example. If people knew that Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International are somehow extension of the CIA, that maybe they might stop giving money to those guys.
Yes. I just had a comment on the screen about Taiwan, and Taiwan is officially recognized by virtually every country in the world as part of China. Well, actually, every country recognizes Taiwan as part of China. It's just a matter of which is the legitimate government of all of China: the People's Republic of China in Beijing, or the Republic of China in Taipei. And a lot of people who have this obsession with Taiwan, they don't even know that the government is called the Republic of China, and it is part of China. And in Taiwan's constitution, it is a Chinese province, is an island province of China. And the comment was making the point that the illusion of autonomy on Taiwan, we always hear the Western media say it's self-governed, it's autonomous. It isn't. That's completely artificial. It would not exist without constant and substantial U.S. Money, political support, and military support. It would not exist without that. So that is not autonomy. It's dependent on Washington. It is a extension of Washington's foreign policy within Chinese territory. So, Angela, maybe you have to explain a little bit about this now. There's this story: Taiwan president plans transit in Los Angeles, New York, government minister. And I also heard that the Speaker of the House, the U.S. Speaker of the House, was talking about a trip to Taiwan. Do you know anything about either one of these trips? And what is your take on this? What does all of this mean?
Well, keep in mind that there's lots of restrictions that Taiwan has, just because Taiwan's constitution is very clear. There's only one China. Legally she could not declare independence. She would have would have to go through a referendum. It's a very complicated process. In order to start a referendum for independence, they would need 75% of votes in what they call the legislative yuan. So that's the main chamber, and then there would be a vote by the people. So it is practically impossible, because most Taiwanese want status quo. And then you have a balanced chamber. It's 50% Kuomintang and 50% DPP of Taiwan. So you don't have necessarily all the DPP that would vote for independence, but then probably all the Kuomintang, the Nationalist Party, they would be against that, because they want to keep the status quo, same as most of the people in Taiwan. So I think it's important just to to put that into the context that she's limited to what she can do, and also that the DPP is actually losing support. We saw the last elections, local elections, which actually were a de facto referendum against Tsai Ing-wen. Well, she lost. It was a bit slap in the face. And you have the Nationalist Party of Kuomintang is actually gaining ground. Why? Because people in Taiwan, they see clearly what is behind this. Tsai Ing-wen, she's not working for the benefits of Taiwanese. She's a puppet, and she's being directed in her decisions. We talked about this, you and I. There are WikiLeaks cables, cables with the AIT. There was the de facto US embassy in Taiwan. And she was actually having meetings, secret meetings already back in 2005, 2006. She was reporting to the AIT on, very sensitive issues. So, she's clearly working for the US, for the globalist agenda and not for Taiwanese people. Then you have the next step is going to be like 2024, the elections, presidential election, and she most probably won't win. So there's a window of opportunity, and I think we should. I mean, these days, I tend to think that there might be a confrontation between China and the US, but does it have to be through Taiwan, because of Taiwan? Because I'm not sure, especially now with the elections getting closer, if the Kuomintang wins, the plan of getting Taiwan on board, doing the same scenario, Ukrainian scenario, getting Taiwan against China might not work. They'll find another solution. They find another reason to go to war against China, and that could be problems, maritime problems. Like you have in the area, you have Japan. Actually, that is actually my main worry is more Japan actually at this point, because Japan is getting extremely aggressive. They are doubling their military spending from now to 2027. Extremely aggressive. They're blaming China because they went from they increased, the GDP increased by 6%, and they increased the military spending by 7%. That's very marginal. It's very proportional to the GDP increase. And they're getting nuts about this. You need to pay close attention to Japan. Japan, they did a reinterpretation of their constitution. So it used to be a Pacific constitution. Now they can come at the help of an ally. And then what they did, they said Taiwan is an ally. So you see, Japan is full on board. And again, Japan is very similar to Germany. Keep in mind, Germany has been lost World War II, and they've been occupied. They've been completely controlled. Their constitution was written by the winners. And you have the party in power, LDP. There's an article in the New York Times says clearly, it was in 1992, says clearly that in the 50s and 60s, the LDP of Japanese LDP, the party of Shinzo Abe, they've been in power forever, was financed by the CIA. That's not me who's saying that. It's not conspiracy theory. That's the New York Times. Just check it, New York Times. So you see, that's the problem. If only people could see that, those proxy war, it's just like US is not fighting their wars anymore. If they do, it's going to be easy wars. Afghanistan, just, they're going to play around. For them, it's like, let's play paintball. We're not going to have much casualties. It's a way to practice. So Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, that's easy. But now when it gets difficult, you know what? Why don't you use Ukrainians? If not enough, we'll use Polish against Russians. Asia, well, why go all the way to Asia? We bought Japanese. They're full on board. We sold them. You have to fight for your freedom and so on. It's a suicide. They're doing a suicide. And it's very angering. I mean,
real quick, because considering how dangerous this is, we just watched Ukraine end up in this proxy war with Russia. It's being completely destroyed. There is no future for Ukraine. Taiwan, this island province of Taiwan, is facing the exact same scenario. And I think the stakes are very high. And the KMT, the question on the screen right now, could they do something like that? Could they say, look, the Democratic Progressive Party, they have these ties with Washington. They reflect Washington's interests at the expense of the existence of the people, the infrastructure, the industry on Taiwan. Maybe even with mainland support, they could solve this problem legally by removing this person from power and removing them from politics. Just imagine if it was the other way around. It was China funding and directing an opposition party in the U.S. that was trying to run the U.S. deliberately into the ground to advance Chinese foreign policy objectives. It wouldn't last even a second. It would never be tolerated. It would be blatant foreign interference, treason, and the people involved will be immediately dealt with. Maybe because things are getting so serious and the clock is running out, maybe the KMT will do something like that. What do you think is the chance of that?
Well, I think
or the military, maybe.
Yeah, maybe the military, but it could go both sides, both ways.
Yes.
You know, there could be they keep in mind there could be a coup. It could go both ways. I think we should not underestimate that. You know, especially since we saw many other cases. You know, it's not, you know, they've been very successful. When you look at how many revolutions they've done, how many coups they've done, you know, and it could get nasty also in Taiwan. I wouldn't be, you know, it is possible, really. You know, or you know, another color revolution in Taiwan, because you know, they've been funding heavily. You know, if you look at the media, you put the ranking of the media in Taiwan. You know who are the biggest one? You know, you have Epoch Time, which is one of the biggest. You know, you have Apple Daily. I think they still have, you know, an entity there in Taiwan. So
Yes. Yeah.
and they kicked away all the pro-Chinese media.
Yes.
I wouldn't be surprised, you know, a coup just by the DPP actually, and then maybe there's a chance that they could get on board, you know, not legally, you know, but again, you see, Ukraine lost their sovereignty in 2014. You know, partially was lost already in 2004. You know, after that, you can say, well, we elected Zelensky. You know, he was democratically elected. No, it was not. You know, once you've lost your sovereignty, you're not a democratic state. You know, so that's a possibility. Anything is possible. There's one thing that we need to keep in mind: that never underestimate the collective West.
Yeah.
You see a lot of people, they're saying, well, you know what, Ukraine is being is losing, you know, NATO is losing, is getting demilitarized and so on. But you know what, if you look at 2019, the Rand Corporation extending Russia, you know, are they, according to what they wanted to do, are they losing? You know, actually what they're doing, they are using Ukrainian lives. And when you look at the spending, even $100 billion for those guys, because they have a printing machine, they can print whatever they want. It's a very low cost compared to what they spend in Afghanistan. So the return on investment they're getting is extremely high. And then who's losing is Europe. But you know what? The US wanted that too. You know, they're getting Europe deindustrialized, you know, and they're getting stronger. They're selling more gas, more expensive, and they hijack completely Europe. Europe was, you know, half, you know, they have some kind of sovereignty and so on. Now it's all gone. All gone. Decisions. Well, this is why Putin now doesn't want to talk to Europeans. First of all, they don't keep their words. But then, you know, Putin is like, why should I talk to you? Decisions are made in Washington. You're not even, you know, president of a state. You are president of a province that belongs to the US. You know, just so you see, their plan so far has gone according, you know, it's been according to their plan so far. Even though, yeah.
Well, that's actually a really good point, because when before this started and when Nord Stream 2 was being built, it seemed almost certain that Europe was going to consolidate its sovereignty and move out from under the shadow of U.S. hegemony over Europe. I thought that was a real possibility, but just as you say, the United States, they know that time is running out. That if they miss this opportunity and the window of opportunity closes entirely, it will never open again. And so they're pulling out all the stops. They will do anything to achieve their objectives, including blowing up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which we still need to talk about. And then in regards to Taiwan, I don't think that there's anything they won't do to ensure. They're openly planning this war with China, openly, as if they already have made the decision. They are going to go to war with China unless China is able to either deter it or prevent this in some way, one way or the other. I don't know. We're in extremely dangerous territory. They've already got a very dangerous proxy war going with Russia and Ukraine. So we have to be really, really careful. The Kuomintang, I mean, Angela, you don't think that they're, I mean, I know you don't, but maybe it wasn't clear to the audience that you don't think that they're this great alternative in Taiwan, but at least they're more practical.
Exactly. Yeah. No, Kuomintang, I mean, it's important to be more precise. Kuomintang, they're not pro-reunification, but they're more pragmatic. They're more down to earth. They know that 50% of the Taiwan Strait is done with China, and they don't want to go to war. So you have those are the adults in the room, really. When you look at when you listen to what they say, it's much more mature. When you look at the DPP, it's all about they're into identity politics. And actually they create these new narratives. They already back in 2003, 2004, Chen Shui-bian, which was, the father figure of the DPP, they started changing the history books, so now you have this generation of Taiwanese, they actually look at their books and they see that the history of Taiwan started only in 1949, when the Kuomintang fled to Taiwan from the mainland. You see, how do you manipulate that, a country? It's by rewriting history books, changing the narrative. Same as in Ukraine.
Ukraine, yeah, they did the exact same thing.
Burn Russian books, but now you start having these new narratives of superiority, this Ukrainian identity. I mean, just if you really learn about Ukrainian history, it's a recent state. It was constructed, artificially constructed, and you had people that didn't, they couldn't see. When back then, when they decided to create Ukraine, this artificial state, they look at themselves, and it was the USSR, and they thought that USSR would be there forever. That it was not this vision to say, well, what if there's a balkanization of the USSR? There was not this thinking. So this is why, and it's been exploited, by the West. The West, what they do, they go into a country and they look at the political landscape, and they look at what are the minorities, we can put them against each other. And then you demonize one side against the other. What did they do? Remember, what did they do in Hong Kong? In Hong Kong, they started telling Hong Kong people, the locals, they started to say, well, you are superior than you brothers, from the mainland who speak Mandarin. While they share exactly the same roots. Who are the people in Hong Kong? People actually moved from mainland early on to Hong Kong. And this is why, I've confronted writers in Hong Kong, and I told them, why don't you look at yourself in the mirror? You are Chinese, and you're not superior. You're not. The Hong Kong is wealthy. Why? Because of the mainland. You don't have electricity. You don't have water. You are servicing the mainland. But you had kids being, you had this sense of superiority. Well, they did the same in Ukraine. They told them you are superior. Russians are orcs. You start depicting those people as being, like bad and so on.
Subhuman. Yeah.
Yeah, I had talks with the Ukrainians. In Switzerland, I met this guy. Yeah, he was actually Mykolaiv. He enrolled into the Ukrainian side, was Russian, and he actually has people from his family that they were fighting from the other side. So they were, he had this girlfriend. She was saying, "Oh, you know what? But Russian are poor. They're not educated. Russia is so poor and so on." And I was, you know what? Or let me Google GDP per capita. And then I say, okay, yeah, well, you're right. And then I say, you know what? Who's rich in Ukraine? The east side. That's why you have the mining, you have some industry and so on. That's the rich side. The other side is poor. She's Ukrainian. She didn't know that. So much ignorance. She was like, no, we are superior. Well, you know what? DNA, you share the same DNA in history. Why don't you learn history? And that's the foundation. That's people don't want. People that control the game, they don't want them to learn. They give you just a few pictures of what they want you to know. Just the minimum. It's very simplistic. Divide and control. What they've done this for thousands of years. Well, how the British Empire controlled India? They didn't have much troops there, but they co-opted. I don't know what they called the rajas, or the kingdoms against each other. Usually, same as in Myanmar. How did they do it? They were actually funding minorities, the minorities against the majority. And this is why later on they left, and then you had those fights starting because there's this resentment. You had those minorities fighting that they were actually co-opted by British Empire.
And when the British left, they, the British government to this day, along with the US, invest huge amounts of money, again, through the National Endowment for Democracy, to keep all of these ethnic and religious and political divides going, because they're still trying to divide and weaken all of these countries. I have this question on the screen, but actually, Angela, you were just talking about Hong Kong and how Hong Kong's wealth comes from mainland China. That is the reason why. And that is also the case for Taiwan. People keep saying that Taiwan is an independent country. It is not. It doesn't even recognize itself as an independent country. There's no such thing as Taiwan, the country. It is entirely dependent for its so-called autonomy, the illusion of autonomy. It is entirely 100% dependent on the US for that. But economically, it is dependent on the rest of China. And that is the reason why inevitably Taiwan will eventually reunify with the rest of China, because economics and people's daily life and their livelihood, that trumps anything else. And eventually that is what's going to bring Taiwan back into the fold. The US knows this. They know that they're out of time. That is why they're rushing to spoil this with conflict. They know there will be peaceful, mutually beneficial reunification, and they want to spoil it by turning it into a conflict before that happens. And this is East Turkestan. This is what US-sponsored separatists in China's region of Xinjiang call Xinjiang. They call it East Turkestan. They are terrorists, and they were killing people, and they're most of them are outside of the country because China has solved this problem as well. And as a matter of fact, there was the East Turkestan Islamic movement. It was a terrorist organization. It still is a terrorist organization. I just read an interview just from this year, like maybe a week or two ago, where the deputy leader of ETIM admitted, yes, we are an armed group. We're using armed force to achieve our political goals. That is literally the definition of terrorism. So this is the game the U.S. is playing, and it's in a real sense, the U.S. is already at war with China. ETIM kills Chinese people. Other terrorist groups that the U.S. backs, the separatists in Baluchistan, southwest Pakistan, they kill Chinese engineers. They made an attempt on the life of the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan. So they are out there just attacking Chinese infrastructure and investment all along their periphery, outside of Chinese borders. In Xinjiang, they were killing Chinese people inside of China. In Hong Kong, they were using violence inside of a Chinese city, Hong Kong. And so this is a proxy war the U.S. is already waging against China. It's just a matter of how far this escalates and how long China exercises this, I would say, almost infinite patience with the United States, because they know time is on their side. I think we should talk about Nord Stream, because it shows how desperate the U.S. has become, and maybe this could give us some insight on how desperate they will become regarding China. So this is from the New York Times. Intelligence suggests, this is U.S. intelligence, suggests pro-Ukrainian group sabotage pipelines, U.S. officials say. So U.S. officials say U.S. officials didn't do Nord Stream 2. It was some other pro-Ukrainian group. And if you read through this, it says they're Ukrainian, maybe Russian national group that is pro-Ukrainian. They did it, and Zelensky and his senior lieutenants had nothing to do with it. Angela, maybe because you looked into some of the details, I've actually done some scuba diving. Angela, you said you did some scuba diving. Why don't you share with the audience your insight into this ridiculous? I mean, you want to talk about conspiracy theories? This is some tinfoil hat conspiracy theory conjuring going on right here.
Well, the level, you need to be, you need to have extremely high level. We're talking about 60 meters, going down 60 meters and pulling off a very complicated project of sabotage. There's probably only a few countries in the world that can do that, maybe Russia, the US, the British, but very few. So here they claim that this was done. I don't have the whole details, but they're talking about a yacht that was actually leased by a billionaire, an oligarch, and then they claim that they found some passports. It reminds me of 9/11. Remember when in 9/11 everything was this big explosion and so on, and they say, "Oh, we found a passport." How can you find a passport like this? Of one of the perpetrators, of the
one thing I want to throw in real quick is, if you read this New York Times article, it says U.S. investigators, U.S. officials still aren't quite sure what all of the details about what happened. And I just think maybe they should just read Seymour Hersh's article about how it happened, how the U.S. blew up this pipeline. I mean, you remember, and I distinctively remember how it was almost palpable, the U.S. desire to stop this pipeline, including by blowing it up. And then it blew up. And it was so, and then they were singing and dancing. They were so happy that it was blown up. And now they're saying, well, we didn't do it. It was some yacht. No, Angela, explain why a small yacht, a relatively small yacht, probably couldn't have been involved in doing this.
No, it's impossible. I mean, this is extremely high level. And we talk about, sensitive waters. It would have been spotted by Denmark, by Sweden, by, all those countries. Do you think they would let you do that? They wouldn't. Why then you have so many countries that are staying silent? There's investigation. Why do you don't want to share? You have something to hide. And it's when we know about the level of intelligence that the US has, and especially those sensitive waters, and that's one of the most sensitive pipelines. It lacks a lot of clarity, but that's on purpose. I think they want, with these new articles from the New York Times, they want to bring in confusion. Yes. So you add this, then you have people, oh, you know what, I heard about, because average Joe, he doesn't have the time to dig in. So I saw that article, I think it made sense, but then I saw that other article, and then you have confusion, and you're like, oh, you know what, I just don't know, but it's not clear, and they leave it there, but who has the time and the energy to do the homework? It takes a lot of time. You need to dig in and so on, but the information is all right there. And actually, it's important to tell people here that are listening that most of the time we use Western information, just because you don't want to be told that you are actually reading all taken from Global Times, China, or TASS or Russia Today. No, we're using mostly Western information. It's all right there. What we are doing is that we are exposing the inconsistencies,
Yes,
the
exactly. It's the Western media lies about a lot of things, blatantly lies, and they'll make claims without any sort of evidence. Then they'll also say things that are true that you can actually find evidence to support, evidence from other Western sources. And then that is exactly what we do. We just point out the inconsistencies, and you can piece together the truth based on what and you can figure out their motives too. Why are they lying about this? If this is the truth, if the BBC said only 16,000 Russians have died in the entire special military operation, how come this guy at the Telegraph is claiming that 20,000 Russians died in Bakhmut alone? It doesn't make any sense. So you can and he doesn't provide a source or explain how he broke that number down. So you can tell who is lying. That really is all we're doing. But I didn't mean to interrupt you, Angelo. Continue.
I don't know. No, but it's just again, is it the first time we've been lied over and over, and just blatant lies? You don't need to be an expert. We had Bucha. Bucha supposedly a Russian crime. We had gas attacks in Syria. I mean, how many times we need to be lied? We even had, remember, I mean, this present war, they tried to put to blame Russians that they were taking Viagra and raping women. They did try to go with that. What was the reaction of Western media? They went along with that, but then they had to retract at some point. There's nothing was made out of nothing. And how can
the damage was already done, and they know that. The Western media knows this. They could go back and salvage their reputation while already knowingly, deliberately causing the damage with impunity.
I think the exposure, they basically that's the technique. They are going to tell you 10 times that lie, and then when they retract, it's going to be just one time a small article, and then they can always say, we retracted, we did our job. No, you know what? What stays is what stays in the mind of people. So when you look at all the news, I mean, not when did this Russophobia, Putin bad, Putin is eating babies and so on. I don't know. I mean, that started a long time ago. Average Joe, what he keeps in his mind is because he gets reptilian. It's like Russia bad. Oh, it's like it's not even rational anymore. So whatever Russia is doing, it doesn't matter. It's so easy when you have pictured Russia being bad. It's so easy to plant another idea. Oh, you know what? They bombed. They said it these days. They bombed the nuclear power plant, Zaporizhia. You want to tell people, wake up. Zaporizhia is in the hands of Russians. Why would you do that?
How could they do that?
How can you do that? You want to bomb yourself? Well, you need to shoot up and hoping that it goes down, and you just have to be sure that you're not there. But it's just absurd. What can you do? You have those mainstream media that go along with that, and people just don't question it, And if they do, they're like, oh, well, they might have made a mistake, but it's all of it,
consistent.
They lie as they breathe. One breath, one lie. One breath, one lie.
So what we're looking at, and the reason why Nord Stream fits in perfectly with, because we're following the proxy war against Russia and Ukraine very closely, and now we can clearly see this this war of aggression the U.S. is planning against China, one way or the other. That is what they're planning to do. And even though common sense would say that the people living on the island province of Taiwan, they don't benefit from being part of this. This war is going to the U.S. has policy papers where they say if China does somehow get in control of this island, start shooting missiles at the infrastructure, blow up the infrastructure, destroy the airports, destroy the seaports, destroy the semiconductor industry. So what they're saying is just burn Taiwan, everything on the island to the ground. Where does that leave the people actually living there? And the CSIS war game, where they war gamed, what if China did a amphibious landing on the island of Taiwan, what would happen? And they're basically saying all life, industry, infrastructure would be scoured off the surface of Taiwan, but they would still have their autonomy, which I've explained is an illusion. They have no autonomy at all. That autonomy is 100% dependent on the U.S. So it's not autonomy. It is a proxy. It is a client regime. And so that is what they're defending. And people need to understand the U.S. is not protecting Taiwan. They are using Taiwan, just like they're using Ukraine. Look at what's happening to Ukraine. This is what is certainly going to happen to Taiwan. This is something we have to constantly keep an eye on and follow. We have to follow all of the developments. We have to break through these lies, because Angela, you're explaining it very well about how they consistently and deliberately lie. There's a purpose behind these lies. They know the Western public is completely ignorant about China. We've tried to break through that ignorance and explain what is really going on. You live in China. I've been to China. I'm in a nation that is more a regional neighbor of China. It's their largest trade partner. And I can see that it's not a threat. And so we need to get this message through to the rest of the public, because what's at stake is it's going to be way worse than Ukraine, and Ukraine can still turn into a much bigger catastrophe if the U.S. decides to escalate there. And they are clearly preparing for war with China, not over Taiwan, using Taiwan through Taiwan. Angela, you got anything else to say? We hit the hour. If there's a lot of questions and answers, if people start asking questions, maybe we could do that for a little while. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts. I think there's a globalist agenda here. When you look at what do they want to achieve, when you look at how they present this, is we are going to be one world and we are going to be happy. We are going to destroy nation state. There's not going to be any borders anymore. No, it's not like this. This is going to be at the expense. It's going to be for the globalist elites that are mainly Western elites, big corporation, at the expenses of the global South. It's going to be on the facade. It's going to look good, but it's a very evil project. It's a project of not only destruction of nation state, but deconstruction of human being. They want to turn people into consumer, slave labor. Just you own nothing, you will be happy, and they don't hide it. Just listen to the World Economic Forum, what they want to achieve. Who they invite to those events. And they're extremely powerful. When you have Karl Schwab from the World Economic Forum, he's inviting to G20. We need to really. And again, when you look at the power of presidents we have in the collective West, they're not working for you. They're working for whoever funds them, whoever controls them. Those are big corporations. The world of tomorrow that they want for us is going to be a world that is run by big corporation. There is nothing to, it's very far from the world they're trying to picture. Freedom and democracy, no, absolutely not. There's another option, the emergence of alternative, like China, Russia, and it's not going to be a bipolar world. It's going to be a multipolar world. It should be much more peaceful, and countries, they need to look for themselves, on the first place. Why in the US they want to impose this globalist agenda? Why don't you take care of Americans first? But then when you do that, they are going to say, well, this is MAGA, make America great again. It's fascist. That those shortcuts. Well, you know what? Macron should take care of France. His first preoccupation should be French people. And that's how I respect people. I will not side for whatever, left or right. This is, those are a joke. I don't fall into this trap. What I look at is people, do they have their sovereignty? Is it a sovereign state? Do they have democracy? Democracy meaning democratos, power to the people, those foundation. And then whoever,
Self-determination.
exactly, and whoever you elect, does he have your interest at heart? Now, what do I see in Europe? They don't. Olaf Scholz, if his main concern was Germans, well, you don't go into this madness to you. They are going against the main supplier of energy, which that's the main reason that it's a very strong industry. And then they are about to go against their main trading partner, China. Do you think he has the best interest of Germany at heart? No. Those guys are globalists. They don't care, they have this globalist agenda, and you know what? If it fails, they have backup plan. Olaf Scholz might have, it might work for, this revolving door is gonna work for a big corporation. Zelensky is gonna be recycled into Hollywood. That they don't care. Because they're being groomed into saying, well, this, you need to look at the bigger picture. We elect you, Zelensky, yeah, but you know what? Why don't you close an eye on those hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians that are going to die? There's a globalist agenda here. You can have a position, very special, but have the bigger picture. Well, Ukrainians, that's a side thing. We have a bigger plan for you.
Yeah, and people have to remember the U.S. is using Ukraine, but the U.S. is also using the rest of Europe. I mean, what they're doing to Germany, like you say, that has nothing to do with the best interests of the German people or even German big business. They're going to lose out on all of this, but the U.S. Has infiltrated their political landscape and taken over, and they're in control just as much as they are in Ukraine. This question right here, if U.S. starts a war with in Taiwan, what stops China from sending 200,000 troops to Lviv, or I call Lvov? And it's an interesting answer because China does not have the ability to project military power all around the globe like the United States does. The U.S. constantly claims that China is this big threat to the entire globe, but it literally cannot. Even if it wanted to, it doesn't want to, and it cannot. It is not making decisions about its military that will allow it any time in the near future to do so. But what China can, and I kind of almost hope they will do, is start arming Russia. There's no reason for them not. The U.S. is going to lie and say China is going to do it anyway, and they're going to put sanctions and use it as an excuse to put sanctions on China anyway. So China might as well reap the benefits of actually doing it, which is bolstering an ally. And because if Russia falters, or if Russia is set back amid this proxy war against it, that is going to weaken multipolarism overall. And so that is an option China can elect to exercise. Angela, you got anything on this?
No, good point. Keep in mind that for China, Russia is an existential thing. If Russia cannot fall, they cannot afford to have a balkanization of Russia, and they will never make it happen. In general, the attitude and the doctrine of Chinese is they are against having allies. Allies are liability. If you want to be consistent, or you need to adopt their position of let's focus on trade, and you enemy is not my enemy. I'm going to trade with your enemy. You just because through trades and through infrastructure and mutual partnerships, maybe long term you solve problems. Chinese, there's a saying they have, and actually that saying they use it for Taiwan. 求同存异, focus on what unites us and set aside the differences. And that's what China wants to do. So when you look at the 12 points that China proposed, they were focusing on the uniting points. It's about uniting. common purposes. So when you go into negotiation, and it's the same with a couple, then just think about it. You have a problem with your wife, for example, and you are going to focus on what unites us. We have a kid together, we have 2 3 kids together. That's what unites us. What are you looking for? What is important for you? Safety, security, prosperity, and so on. And that's what China does. We have issues, yes, we do, but let's set them aside for now, and let's focus on what unites us. And that's what they've been doing. This saying of 主动生意, they've been using it with Taiwan all along, saying, well, you know what, we know we have differences, but focus on what unites us. And that they've been very successful. That why, focus on trade, and there was prosperity on the both sides. And that's the attitude. What the West is doing is exactly the opposite. It's a dividing. It's always dividing. And actually, that's the source. It's sadly, democracy, the theory of democracy, it's nice, but in reality, it's built on dividing very often. You need to have maturity. Those are preconditions. There are many preconditions to have an ideal democracy, but here, those are system of dividing. And somehow, you know what? Well, look at what the US is doing. They're dividing, and somehow that's the way they control you at the end, because it doesn't matter. You vote Democrats or Republicans. You know what? You vote. You give legitimacy to a rigged system. It's it's just a release. You call it a release valve, right?
It's a interesting couple of things that you just said, because I think it's starting to answer this next question: how do you stop this? And I don't know. I would hesitate to call it globalist. I would say it's just old-fashioned imperialism. Yeah. It's a Anglo-American imperialism, mostly American at this point. And I believe that it's in severe decline. It's desperate, but because of that, that's what makes it most dangerous of all. What do we do about this? Well, Angela, you were just talking about how you could lean left or right, or you could even be really hardcore left or right, but find common ground for things that actually matter. The U.S., they need healthcare, they need infrastructure, they need to improve education. Communities need to come together. These are things that I think doesn't matter whether you're left or right. You could agree that these things need to happen, and there's ways you could agree to do this. So that's one thing. Number two, there is this concept of multipolarism. Nations are already doing it. Pay into that instead of into unipolar corporations and financial institutions associated with unipolar hegemony. The US, the Fortune 500, Wall Street, these are all corporations we know about. They're everywhere. It's hard not to put your money into them. But if you can even start reducing by a few percentage points and directing your money locally to local businesses in your community, or to companies outside of the US, you're going to transfer the money and wealth that has made them powerful in the first place. You're going to distribute it elsewhere. And this is already happening. This is why multipolarism is working. Russia and China didn't protest at the UN, and that's how multipolarism is taking root. They created their own industry, their own alternative financial institutions and networks and services and everything imaginable. And people are paying into it. It's giving them money and thus power, and they are balancing this concentrated power in the West. They're balancing it out worldwide. That is the whole concept behind multipolarism. Have any other ideas? I'm going to look for a couple of other questions. You have any other ideas, Angela, about this?
No, I concur. Absolutely. Dennis, well, hold them to account for the terror they have inflicted on humanity. Well, I just don't know. Well, they should.
Yeah, hold them account. Yeah, that will be very hard to. That will be very hard to do.
Very hard. I think we shouldn't have those ambitions. I think I think it's very noble just already to have the ambitions just to preserve peace. That's already good,
And this question, if the people and military of Taiwan have no appetite for conflict with the mainland, what's the backup plan for the US, Japan, South Korea. And I think, yes, Angela, you said it many times, fight to the last person on Taiwan, and then after that, the last Japanese, and then the last South Korean. And the U.S. has all kinds of plans on how to get China to shoot missiles at their bases, to drag Japan and South Korea into any sort of conflict. So it's a very dangerous time. And what I think people in this region here in Asia, nations that actually reside in the region, not the United States, thousands of miles away, that to understand that stability is key to peace and prosperity for everyone in Asia. And the US is deliberately seeking to upturn it, not just to target China, but to target all of Asia. The US wants a weak and divided Asia, not just a weak and divided China, all of Asia to be subordinated to the US. And when nations, you have these governments that are cooperating with the United States, client regimes that are installed into power, or governments that are maybe not taking this as serious as we think they should, you are jeopardizing just your own peace, prosperity, and future. Also, people need to just look at Europe right now. All of Europe, not just Eastern Europe, not just Ukraine, not just Eastern Europe, all of Europe is suffering now because of the proxy war the US has dragged them all into. I hope that Asia is smarter than that and is able to step over this trap rather than directly into it, as Europe has done. Angela?
Yeah, I think we need to be extremely careful. There's when you look at who's siding with whom, and there's realpolitik. We need to look at the long-term gain. It's extremely sensitive. Some countries, some leaders are taking pragmatic decisions. And so when you see Lula, that seems to side a bit more these days with the West. We need to be careful. It's the long-term game, and they need to preserve. They need. If you're a good president, good leader, you need to look at your country's interest. So you need to be pragmatic. Going all the way for one side, that's a big mistake. So you need to be careful. You need to side. If you side, you need to side with the winner that you're sure that's going to win, or just be pragmatic. If you are dragged into a war that's not good for your country. So we need to be careful. There are some signs. For example, I'll give you an example. The Philippines is accepting to open military bases to the US. What is the message? Maybe the Philippines is trying to preserve itself. They're giving a little bit, but not all the way. They're not gonna have missiles aiming at China. I doubt that. That would be going too far. Then you have Thailand doing exercises with the US. Is it a sign that Thailand is siding with the US? No, it's not. It's being pragmatic. And then you have some hostages. But even in Europe, why do you think that they had to bomb Nord Stream 2? Because they knew that somehow maybe Germany would just make a step towards Russia, and maybe they could mend this damaged relationship. So you see, why did they have to do that? So there's their shift, but there are some extremely interesting shifts, that we need to pay attention. Saudi Arabia, that's a very good one. India, it's a very interesting one. They were supposed to be allied. They're not going to go blindly. And some just buying time. You know what? Let's keep on doing what the US want us to do, but not all the way.